title of this podcast is Our History, QueerMuzeum Warszawa. It is a grassroots initiative, an open space for engaging with the history of LGBTQ+ individuals and communities. It serves as a repository for documents, artifacts and testimonies, offering a platform to preserve and share them.
As the first institution of its kind in Poland and one of the few worldwide, the museum aims to complement mainstream history, reclaim what has been forgotten, erased or silenced, and restore the presence of marginalized narratives. And today we have a special edition, I would say, or a special episode of our podcast. Our guest is today Dr. Noah Munier. Hello, Noah.
Hi.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
And making this podcast more international, but also like showing that our Queer Museum is also the initiative which is really international in a way of not only about the contributions of people from abroad, but also when we are thinking about cooperation with historians and other researchers, not only from Poland. You are like the first sign of that. So thank you for being here.
It's an honor. Thank you so much.
So tell us something about the object today. What kind of object we have from the archive of QueerMuzeum Warsaw?
Yeah, I have a beautiful photo of Franciszek Ludwik Neugebauer. He was at the time, I think this photo is shot between 1887 and 1914 during his Warsaw time in his studio. Franciszek Ludwik Neugebauer was at the time one of the most famous and the expert, top of the world on intergender. And we see him sitting in front of his desk in a light colored suit. The sun falls through the window into his face and he is studying or organizing somehow. And in front of him there are many papers and he's somehow contemplating into his work, or maybe he's just staging that for the photographer. Yeah. But what is more interesting, or also very interesting in the photo, is that we see in the background a very big library, like two big shelves full of materials, mainly books, but also somehow it looks like a collection of his work. And indeed, he was a very big collector also on the field he was working in, because he was born in Kaliszu in 1854, and Russian partition at the time, and that's important. And later, born into a family of doctors. His father was also a very famous gynecologist, one of the founders of Polish gynecology at the time, and Franciszek followed his path somehow, but focused a bit differently in the field. And in his Warsaw times, he was already well-known intellectual somehow, and due to also his education in other universities in Europe, and he also went to America. So he spoke several languages, not only Russian, but also, of course, Polish, and published also several articles in Polish on intergender subjects. At the time, they called it Hermaphroditism, and but also he spoke German, very important also at the time to build a bridge between these areas in Europe. And one of the most important monographies he published was called Der Hermaphroditismus im Menschen, Hermaphroditism in the Human. And
which year?
1908. And it is a vast collection on intergender so-called cases, 750 pages, an introduction, of course, but also mainly it is a collection of medical studies on people who are gender non-conforming, and this is also, I think, one of his biggest successes somehow to come up with this collection. Yeah, to come forward. He is at the brink of modernity. He collects this material and is also somehow connecting not only. Yeah, but mainly through his studies also with Magnus Hirschfeld, who at the time was a German Jewish scholar who was working on also on sexual intermediaries. He called it die sexuellen Zwischenstufen. Hirschfeld wanted to elaborate a concept of gender that is out of the binary between male and female. And therefore, he came up with this idea of multiple gender or sex positions in between these two poles of, he called it, I think, voll Mann and voll Weib at the time, which was also connected to desire. Like a gender position could be connected to desire. It could be connected to the presentation of the gender, but also to the inner self-conceptualization of gender. And I think Franciszek Ludwik Neugebauer, he connected to this idea as well.
But can you tell us something more about their personal relationship? Of course, we know the story, but I think it's a really good, I wanted to say gossip, but actually it has happened. But I mean the story from the beginning of 20th century in Breslau that time, so today's Wrocław. I think it's a really good story to show what it meant at that time to be a friend of Hirschfeld.
In 1904, Magnus Hirschfeld, he came to the Congress of the Natural History Society to Wrocław, Breslau at the time, and he was giving a talk on the subject of sexual intermediaries, on gender non-conforming people, and Hirschfeld brought with him two of his patients to show them and the phenomenon, let's say, to the auditorium. Professors of physiology, anatomy, and you can imagine that Hirschfeld's thesis at the time was also very controversial, and those, like, as well-established professors were out of their mind. They were screaming in the auditorium. They definitely did not want to see those kind of bodies, those kind of subjects also, and were also not agreeing on the idea of a gender being something else than in the binary. So they were screaming to the auditorium, and Hirschfeld was shocked. Also, he's reporting that in a memoir of himself, and later decided to go with his two patients. One was an intergender person, and the other one was a trans man. I
think you're right.
Yeah. And they went to a beer garden afterwards. I mean, Wrocław today, you can totally imagine sitting next to the river and drinking a beer. And all three of them were sitting at the table. And one of these colleagues that were out of their mind before came to the table and were stating also that this is not correct, that it's not according to the status of the doctor to go out for a meal or a beer with the patients, and at this moment, Franciszek Ludwik Neugebauer showed up, and
of course late.
as an international scholar at the time, he had the guts somehow to counter this position of this. of this professor that was a bit rude, let's say, and he was sitting together with them finally, and they all were having a meal or a beer in Wrocław's beautiful beer gardens, and therefore we can see also how both of them were approaching their patients. We see today these photographs of intergender people at the time, also in Franciszek Ludwik Neugebauer's monography. We see photos that are quite exposing, or also drawings that are, for our eye nowadays, show exposure and are also like show a violent gaze as well. And but when we hear about this memoir of Hirschfeld telling us this story, that they were sitting together at the table, having a beer, chatting, and also, I think, somehow re-navigating the situation that was happening before, we can see that there is a lot of respect also towards these people. And we can see it also in Hirschfeld's Institute for Sexual Science, in the Weimar Republic in Berlin. It was not only a research center, but also it was a haven for queer and gender non-conforming people. Thinking about Charlotte Scholak and Toni Ebel, but also Dora Richter, they had the possibility to also work there. It was not only a place where they could get advice, but they were themselves providing advice for other transgendered or gender non-conforming people, and that's like groundbreaking. And I think that Franciszek Ludwik Neugebauer is also, we can see that he is connecting with this idea of helping also, and acknowledging them as subjects and not only as objects of scientific knowledge, and maybe that far.
I would like to ask you of the social impact, because when we were working on the timeline exhibition in the museum, what struck me enormously was that the level of transphobia, let's say, and the level of accepting gender non-conforming people in the 1920s and 30s, which was much higher than it is today. So, we have these stories also from the communist Poland, by the way, about, in a sense, public celebration of, let's say, for example, gender or sex assignment, and everybody's happy that it happens. There is not such a big case about, for example, sports person, which we experienced during the last Olympic Games in Paris, when it was unimaginable. So, is this impression true? I mean, were they influential at the time, and how your studies show this kind of public presence of the gender non-conforming people in the 1920s, 30s?
Yeah, I think they were having a big impact, those books. Thinking about Hirschfeld also, when he was writing Die Transvestiten, the transvestites. Of course, today we think we know that this terminology is wrong and outdated and pejorative somehow. This collection that Hirschfeld came up with in 1910 and 1912 had a huge impact also on the visibility and the self-conceptualizations of transgendered people, so that there was for the first time an idea how to conceptualize themselves, being a third gender, or they had a word to think about themselves and identify themselves, and that in itself had a huge impact on how people could also politically organize somewhat, and push also for their rights of later on also of reassigning their gender in law, and I think it had a huge impact. Thinking also about the 1920s, the term die Transvestiten, which was really terminology that Hirschfeld brought into the field, and it was taken by the media as well, and in newspapers. This term was, at a certain point, shortly after the main publication, it was used and distributed in the media. So I think,
And what about law? this is also interesting because you mentioned, you told us something about the language, but like to continue this this answer, I'm thinking about, for example, Transvestitenschein. Like for us, when we are comparing like the history of Poland and gender non-conforming people, it is, you know, it is something like something unbelievable. And in Germany, after 1920, it was possible. So this is like, I think, important to mention.
Absolutely, yeah. Transvestitenscheine, a kind of passport for transgendered people in the 1920s, mostly, but also until the 1930s. We had this in Germany, that Hirschfeld, for example, he would have to write a doctor's note, and with this doctor's note, you could apply for this passport. So we have the paragraph 360, for example, or the paragraph 183 that were both addressing also gender non-conforming people, transgendered people. Paragraph 360 is in Germany, we have this word grober Unfug. I do not have the translation, but it's somehow against, acting in a way against the society. And 183 is Erregung öffentlichen Ärgernisses, which is showing publicly indecency. And both of these paragraphs could be used against gender non-conforming people. And the so-called Transvestitenschein was protecting somehow from police on the street taking them into custody, and therefore they could show, okay, I'm a transgendered person. I have a doctor's note, and you can walk freely. Yeah, so there was, of course, it's somehow, I think it's interesting to compare it also to Poland. That, of course, in Germany we have a regulation for that instead of having this free space that is also able to navigate somehow, where like individuals navigating a zone of possibilities, But Germany had a regulation for that, and it allowed, let's say, relatively a freedom, relatively freedoms. In a certain kind of sphere. Yeah, there was a control, of course, there was a registration as well, but it also allowed transgendered people and gender non-conforming people a certain kind of freedom in a sphere that was kind of
defined by the law.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I will continue that because before I didn't catch you actually, because you mentioned Toni Abel, Charlotte Scharlag, and Dora Richter. And when we are talking about Transvestitenschein, these passports or IDs for transgender people, immediately I have in my mind that Toni, it was one of these examples of so-called Direktivennamen, and this is also something which is interesting in this situation, that it wasn't only about IDs. It was also like having a safe space on the street, but it was also about the names. You could change the name and have it in this document. So if you wanted to be if you wanted to change the name, it was somehow possible due to this legal procedure. However, for example, Dora, she chose her name. Charlotte, she chose her name. But Toni, it was the name like somehow from the group of the names chosen by the government. And this is somehow, I think, important to mention. That's why many people from that time in Germany, they are Toni, Gerd, or Theo, or Alex, because this was this group of names. But I think comparing to the today's to today, or to the history after 1945, is really important to mention that.
I agree.
Okay, so tell us more about your research, which are also connected somehow with QueerMuzeum and our archive. I mean, all of these networks, transgender networks, which are And I think for me it was a big shock that at the end of 20s, the beginning of 30s, there was a big transgender network in Europe, also connected somehow with Poland. We do not have this protagonists in our exhibitions. Still, we have some others, and I suppose they could know each other, could have known each other. So, like, tell us something about this, because it's, I think, extremely important also to change also our point of view about this past.
Absolutely, yeah. As you said, Joanna, unexpectedly, also after the rise of the Nazis, after Nazis came to power in 1933, in Germany at the time, there was a vast network of transgendered people, and the core or the heart of this network was a queer couple living in Berlin, Hella Knabe and her partner Lili Knabe. They both had a mail order service for transgender people. So they were selling, for example, artificial breasts or wigs, certain kind of lingerie or corsets, self-tailored by Hella Knabe, but also Hella was an entrepreneur, and she had also other workers who were doing those kind of dresses for mostly trans women. Her customers were spread out over the Reich at the time, from Freiburg in Baden-Württemberg to Zielona Góra today, Grünberg at the time, and Gdansk, Danzig, until Kaliningrad. Yeah, so it was really a huge network of people who could also rent a room at Hella and Lili's apartment in Berlin in the Habsburger Straße in Berlin-Schöneberg, and Hella and also Lili, who was a transgendered person themselves, would take care of the customers. Yeah, so for example, Hella would help with dress up and makeup, and they would go together for the cinema or on the streets, and would also give advice in body language, and so it was like somehow you could book a self-care all-inclusive package in times of terror against sexual minorities. Yeah, and in 1937, another important aspect of this network was also that there was a magazine that was produced from 1933 onwards. Hella and Lili were producing a queer magazine. Yeah, at this moment, queer subculture in Berlin was destroyed. Yeah, Institute of Sexual Science in Berlin was raided and completely destroyed. The collection of Hirschfeld was burned at Opernplatz in May 1933, and Hella and Lili, they managed to keep up a sparkle of queer culture during this time. And the magazine was was presenting different kind of content. Customers could also write little stories, imaginative but also historical stories on trans issues, and could also give little annonces where they could contact each other through. Yeah, so it was the connector, like between them also somehow was this magazine where they all many of them participated. We are talking about, let's say, 100 people. We do not know exactly, but from the sources I studied in Berlin, we have a number of about 100 names, but it doesn't mean that this network was exactly this number, because these were the names that were found in the correspondence by the police in 1937, because both of them, Hella and Lili, were denunciated by a Berlin or east of Berlin living lady. She was also a member of the party, and she denunciated Hella and Lili for distributing this queer magazine. Yeah, and therefore in summer 1937, police raided their apartment and got hold of the correspondence of both of them. Yeah, and in this moment. Die Reichszentrale for Indecent Publications got hold of the situation, and they immediately started to investigate in certain kind of parts in Germany at the time, and they got hold immediately also of Georgette, living in Zielona Góra, Grünberg at the time, a trans woman who worked as a bookbinder, having a life in Grünberg as Georg Demel, signing in as the bookstore of Georgette was even called that name. That's why I'm mentioning it here, not because I wanted that name, but I think there were also two identities that this person was pursuing somehow and living. And Georgette was married to a Polish woman, actually, Agnes, and they lived in Zielona Góra as a queer couple, and I think. They were also, for example, going together out in Georgette in a dress and Agnes accompanying her, and it's quite very beautiful because we also found photography of these moments, gorgeous photographies that were depicting them together, also indoors but also outdoors, and again, this is like this beautiful trace of transgendered history into today's Poland that this vast collection gives us insight into, and speaks to us somehow, especially because of the photography. It becomes very vivid immediately. We see an individual that is somehow
there is no good word.
I would say sparkle again, but it's beautiful. And Georgette was also persecuted and prosecuted also by a Berlin court because of distributing indecent material. Yeah, so. But Georgette and Agnes were able to. Survive the Second World War, and later moved west to Frankfurt and started a new life after times changed. Yeah, so and also, for example, at the same moment when the police started to get hold of Georgette in Gdansk, there was a professor of biology, Mathilde, Professor Wanger and she worked at the Polytechnicum, being a respectable professor and having a family in Wrześć, Langfuhr, and she was one of the authors of the queer magazine of Hella and Lili Knabe, and the police figured that through studying the correspondences and immediately activated Gdansk or the Danziger Polizei at the time, and also they also started to somehow destroy this queer life in Gdansk of Mathilde, because she was put highly under pressure. There was a court trial as well, and we do not know exactly what happened, but during this period of the process, Mathilde died. So, and we do not know if it was a heart attack. We researched also the Sterbeurkunde, the document of death, and it's not exactly said what happened, but it could also be suicide from my point of view. but it's not written down in this document. But it's a very unexpected, sudden death. It's one of these sad stories, but I think it's also important to mention how state repression and persecution of queer people to what it can lead also.
But what I think is important also, because I can imagine that you could be able to tell us maybe not hundreds but tens of the stories from this network. But I think what is important to mention that even this collection gives us let's say the tip, like a trace that still in 2025 we have a lot to do, and we have to do it together. I mean, like in a cooperation, because when I'm thinking about the story of Mathilde or Georgette or others, not even connected with the networks, other biographies, really often because of political changes, it has to be done by Polish and German or I don't know, Czech, Slovak, researchers from other countries, even because of the language or because of this political changes after 1945. So I think it's let's think about this, your research and this convolute, I wanted to say, it's collection, I'm sorry, we'll cut it, about this collection as a introduction and invitation to this cooperation, which is also important for us in our museum.
Yeah, and also because I like particularly in this story of Georgette and Agnieszka that it shows very clearly how queer transcends all these artificial national ethnic borders and identities. So if we studying queer history is also about, destroying, abolishing these borders between people, I think. So let's do it together.
I absolutely agree.
Exactly. So tell us at the end of this special chapter, tell us something about the future. Well, like, do you have any plans for your transgender?
I think it's absolutely also important to think about what, not only about, of course, about our historical protagonists, but also we as a culture of remembrance, what is this giving to us? And if it's for us also it gives us maybe a possibility to overcome these boundaries and borders also in our heads. And I absolutely agree that we should study and work on this history together, because this is the future. It's a European history also. Yeah, it's not. It's very widely interconnected, and it is almost impossible to do it alone. It's important to not only ask the archive for the documents of the persecutorial institutions, but also go to the places, go to Zielona Góra, go to Gdansk today, and work together with the local community to get a different insight into our protagonists, to see different sources. For example, last year we went to Zielona Góra and we worked together with Mata Gendera on and also Maria Magdalena Kozłowska on Georgetta in Zielona Góra, and we went to the historical building of the book bindery, and we were able to find a photo of the book shop at the time where those magazines were printed and sent from there to all over Europe somehow. Yeah, parts of course, but still it's pretty amazing. And we were able to commemorate with the local community this certain queer history. Yeah,
it shows that the Queer Museum is only the beginning of the trails, of many trails. And thank you so much for showing us another universes, another trails, another roads that we can walk with you together and see these amazing human stories. It was really a pleasure and honor to listen to you today.
Thank you so much. It was also my pleasure.
It was a pleasure to have you here, and I'm thinking that the last sentence should be that we started with Neugebauer, we had Magnus Hirschfeld, Charlotte Sherlock, Tony Abel, Dora Richter, all of this
Georgette,
Mathilde, and all of that beautiful sisters.
Siostry.